60 trees gone before sunrise? You think this view belongs to you?
You don't get to decide what's mine, Claudia. Not legally, not socially, not morally.
60 trees gone before sunrise? You think this view belongs to you? Claudia Whitmore's voice cut through the fog that hovered over the lake like a damp curtain. Wet cedar and mud clinging to the air from overnight rain, her polished flats crunching on the gravel driveway, as she gestured toward the cleared strip of land with a smirk that screamed entitlement. Logan Pierce adjusted the thermos in his hand, feeling the cold morning air bite through his flannel as he stepped onto the muddy shoreline where the towering oaks once cast their shade. Pickup trucks idling behind the neighboring lots, the faint sound of metal roofs rattling under the rain, and replied calmly, "You don't get to decide what's mine, Claudia. Not legally, not socially, not morally." Her smile faltered, just enough for a flicker of irritation to register as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar, the lake rippling under fog pressure that seemed to press them both into the moment. Around the bend, the county offices stood silently in the distance, courthouse rain pattering softly against the windows, echoing the tension of authority waiting to be called upon. Yet Logan didn't move hastily. He allowed the pause, letting Claudia's entitlement stew, her hands twitching with the invisible power she assumed. Public pressure already building as neighbors' cars crept past, curious glances in their rearview mirrors. "You think a 100-foot silo overnight changes nothing?" Logan continued, his voice even but layered with restrained fury, eyes scanning the muddy shoreline and fishing docks where subtle boundary markers indicated property lines she had ignored, social consequences simmering in the air, while she clenched her clipboard a fraction tighter, passive-aggressive control visibly straining through her polished manipulation, the gravel crunching underfoot like an audible heartbeat. Every second a small humiliation as Logan's calm intelligence and clear ownership radiated authority. Her voice, now clipped and sharp, tried to cut through. "You can't just." These trees provided the neighborhood with perspective, beauty, order. But each word was met with Logan's steady gaze, the cold air fog over water making each syllable linger, layering tension, exposing motive, reinforcing social imbalance. They blocked no one but your sense of entitlement. "The documents from county zoning and easement rights are in my hands, each verified, each time-stamped." A subtle shift occurred as he dropped a folder on the gravel driveway, the thud resonating like a legal gavel, revealing new evidence, a timeline of HOA violations, previous complaints, and neighbor statements that challenged her assumed authority. The smell of wet cedar mixed with coffee from his thermos as he stepped back, letting silence punctuate the moment, fog curling over the water, the lake wind carrying whispers from onlookers who had begun to gather along the shoreline, some nodding, some shaking their heads in quiet recognition of the injustice. Claudia's posture shifted, confidence to irritation, a micro-expression of concern flickering as her social armor faced exposure, while Logan maintained controlled power, absorbing the environmental tension, internalizing the courthouse rain and muddy shoreline, as if drawing strength from the American landscape itself. "Comment below with your city. Let me see where you're watching from." Logan added without breaking his calm, his voice a thread pulling audience outrage directly into the narrative. And as the wind tugged at his flannel, the fog pressing and distant thunder rolling over the lake, the scene held a precise balance of authority, humiliation, legal potential, and environmental atmosphere, each element escalating Claudia's concern and the public perception. Logan's controlled response layering emotional depth, strategic clarity, and social consequence in preparation. For the next moves, every sound, sight, and document a calculated stroke in the unfolding legal thriller, leaving viewers on edge, caught in the weight of prestige, procedural power, and atmospheric pressure that promises that this story is far from over. The fog had thickened over the lake by the time Logan Pierce stepped back from the thermos he had been gripping, the scent of wet cedar mingling with the damp mud clinging to his boots as his gaze followed the gravel driveway winding past, where pickup trucks sat idling, neighbors pausing their morning routines to glance, and then quickly look away, the courthouse rain earlier still dripping off metal roofs echoing in his mind, a reminder of procedural weight and social scrutiny. Claudia Whitmore shifted her posture, her clipboard now clutched like a shield as the wind tugged at her tailored blazer, a micro-expression of irritation crossing her face before she forced a tight smile. Do you think this is a game, Logan? People notice when you overstep boundaries. Logan's voice remained calm, low and deliberate, carrying over the cold morning air with an authority that drew attention without raising volume. I am not overstepping. I am asserting what is already mine. The property lines are clear. Your permits do not cover these actions, and every neighbor here can see what has been done. A ripple ran through the faint gathering at the shoreline. Subtle glances exchanged as fog pressed against the water and the lake wind carried the tension, social pressure mounting silently, yet unmistakably. Claudia's eyes darted briefly toward the fishing docks, the wet cedar smell sharper now, as if drawing in the cold air to steady herself. I am the board, Logan. This community respects structure, hierarchy. You cannot just decide what is appropriate. Logan lifted a finger to indicate the cleared land, muddy shoreline now exposed. Structure is not power when it violates law. I have verified every easement, zoning code, and prior complaint. The timeline of your previous intrusions is documented. Every violation notice, every misrepresented claim, every statement from the neighbors. All accounted for. He paused, letting the silence sink in as droplets from the lake wind dampened the edges of his notebook, a subtle shift in emotional gravity as Claudia's smug confidence flickered toward irritation. The social consequence of public witness pressing down, the courthouse rain earlier still resonating in his memory like a prelude to accountability. You think neighbors will turn a blind eye? He continued, voice steady but layered with controlled intensity, each word a legal and social assertion. They see the reality. Every gossip, every whisper at morning walks, every side glance as you parade authority where it does not exist. This is a public observation, not a private dispute. Claudia inhaled sharply, realizing the undercurrent of attention, the subtle shift in perception forming a tide that could undermine her influence, her entitlement showing cracks as the cold air and fog seemed to press harder, externalizing the internal panic that Logan's calm intelligence had induced. The gravel crunched under her shoes as she stepped back slightly, recalculating posture, strategy, influence, while Logan took a measured step toward the cleared land, camera already set to document the perimeter, each movement a silent legal escalation, each breath a layering of social exposure and public accountability. The mist over the water wrapped around them both, the wind carrying faint sounds of distant coffee cups clinking, a reminder of human presence and attention, neighbors already internalizing observation, their perception weighing subtly against Claudia's facade. Logan's eyes scanned the muddy shoreline again, noting details that others might miss, measuring power, recording social dynamics, timing, the cold air crystallizing his focus, layering legal discovery with strategic anticipation. If this continues, the repercussions extend beyond perception. Liability, exposure, and social consequences will converge. Claudia's lips parted, a flicker of unease, not defeat but recognition that the momentum was shifting, the social tide moving toward Logan, each measured word, each controlled gesture amplifying the imbalance, the public pressure unseen but palpably felt. The lake wind tugged, fog over water curling in spirals, courthouse echoes lingering in memory, the diner silence from earlier still imprinting restraint, Logan adjusting his coffee thermos, steady, methodical, emotionally deep, while Claudia's posture betrayed a subtle fear of losing the legacy she had assumed control over. Audience sensing the power dynamics, the emotional shift. The new discovery that the battle was no longer abstract but visible, legal, social, and strategically inevitable. Every layer tightening, escalating naturally, creating a sense that the story was expanding, accountability closing in, and every neighbor who glanced from behind curtains or over fences was now unwittingly a witness to the unraveling control. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We'd love to improve and make the next video even better. The cold morning air had deepened as Logan Pierce stepped along the muddy shoreline, fog curling over the water in thick, rolling layers, each swirl carrying whispers from neighbors who paused at the fishing docks to glance, their eyes betraying curiosity and judgment. The gravel driveway glistened from overnight rain, puddles reflecting the muted light of a sky heavy with courthouse rain and distant thunder. Claudia Whitmore lingered at the edge of the cleared land, her polished loafers pressed into wet soil, clipboard clutched like armor, lips pressed tight in a controlled smile that did not reach her eyes, the subtle tension of passive-aggressive authority visible in the slight tremor of her hand. Logan, holding a notebook now dampened by lake mist, shifted his weight, letting silence stretch, the diner-like quiet settling over the scene, punctuated only by the wind and the occasional drip from metal roofs. He spoke slowly, measured. Neighbors are noticing patterns. The removal of these trees is on record. Conversations, observations, subtle questions. It is not just about what is gone. It is about how the community perceives actions and intent. Claudia's eyebrows arched briefly, a micro-expression of irritation that she quickly masked with a forced nod, but her gaze flicked toward the dock where a pickup truck had paused, the driver leaning forward, coffee thermos in hand, clearly registering the scene. Logan continued, voice calm but layered with intent. I have documented every step, every violation notice, every misstatement. The timeline demonstrates repeated overreach. Public perception is shifting, Claudia. The narrative is no longer under your control. The fog pressed closer, enveloping her polished manipulation in a gray haze, the social consequence mounting visibly as residents watched from porches, sideways glances and hushed discussions forming an invisible chorus of scrutiny. Claudia's lips parted, her tone tight, carefully measured. You think the neighbors are on your side? You think documentation matters more than authority? Logan's hand rested on the notebook, water droplets sliding across pages, his eyes fixed, calm yet piercing. Authority without law is empty. Observation and evidence guide social consequence and legal recourse. Your control is temporary if it ignores both. The lake wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of wet cedar and the distant echo of rain on the metal roof of the county office. And with each gust, Logan felt a subtle reinforcement of strategy, the environmental tension layering on his resolve, while Claudia's posture began to reflect concern beneath the surface of entitlement, a hesitation she could not fully mask. The veneer of smug control cracking under the weight of public attention and documented evidence. A small group of neighbors had begun to edge along the shoreline, cameras discreetly raised, their presence a quiet but potent social pressure. Logan adjusted his thermos, taking a measured sip, noting the way her eyes darted to each observer, the realization of exposure dawning in subtle shifts of her breathing and stance. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We'd love to improve and make the next video even better, he added, his voice carrying across the fog and muddy shoreline. Not a taunt, but a controlled signal to both the antagonist and the audience that power was actively shifting, social consequences accruing, and every measured detail, from wet cedar scent to courthouse rain memory, was a tactical component in the unfolding prestige legal thriller. The story extending in tension, observation, and anticipation, each moment layering the villain's fear, the protagonist's strategy, and the public's perception into a continuous escalation that promised further consequence. The fog had thickened even further by mid-morning, curling over the lake in ghostly ribbons, while the muddy shoreline reflected the gray wash of courthouse rain still lingering from earlier, the distant rumble of thunder echoing like an unspoken warning. Logan Pierce moved deliberately along the perimeter of the cleared land, thermos in hand, noting the pickup trucks parked in hesitant clusters along the gravel driveway, neighbors craning to see what was unfolding, their whispered judgments already rippling through the community. Claudia Whitmore's posture stiffened as she stepped onto the exposed earth, the wet cedar scent clinging to her blazer, her clipboard trembling subtly with the tension she tried to mask. I am simply maintaining community standards, Logan, she said, voice even but edged with a forced authority that betrayed her frustration, her polished manipulation straining under observation. Logan's gaze remained steady, layered with calm intelligence. Standards do not extend to unilateral destruction of property. The observation is public, documented, and undeniable. Social perception is shifting against unilateral action. A hush settled briefly across the dock area, the diner's silence palpable, punctuated only by the wind skimming over fog-laden water and the distant metallic drip of rain off metal roofs, as onlookers absorbed the dynamic. Claudia's eyes flicked toward a neighbor stepping cautiously closer, notebook in hand, phone poised, recording each motion, the social consequence building silently but relentlessly. Logan continued, voice low, each syllable a carefully measured escalation. Every step taken without proper authority is recorded, each witness accounted for, each deviation from approved procedures visible to all who care to observe. The corners of her mouth tightened, a micro-expression of panic barely contained, her entitlement colliding with reality as the fog and lake wind seemed to press in, amplifying the tension. Logan bent slightly to adjust a marker near the shoreline, the movement deliberate, signaling strategic awareness of both environmental and social dimensions. While Claudia's composure cracked imperceptibly, a flicker of doubt passing through her eyes as residents along the waterfront exchanged subtle glances, their curiosity mingling with judgment. "You cannot assume these boundaries are yours alone," Claudia said, a sharpened edge in her tone as her hand hovered over the clipboard. The polished control she wielded now strained by observation, audience scrutiny, and evidence accumulation. Logan's voice remained calm, layered with legal and social weight. Assumptions are irrelevant. Facts, documentation, and community witness statements define legitimacy. The balance of perception and legality is shifting, and you are already on the losing side of both. The fog thickened, wrapping them in a suspended moment of suspense, the courthouse rain memory echoing with every gust across the muddy shoreline. The smell of wet cedar and rain-drenched gravel carrying through the air, heightening the emotional stakes. Logan's controlled presence, the notebook damp but methodically organized, and the subtle documentation of each reaction amplified the social consequences. Neighbors now visibly reassessing Claudia's authority, some avoiding eye contact while others whispered between themselves. Gossip quietly forming a network that worked against her. A flicker of concern crossed her eyes as Logan's strategy became evident, the public and legal pressures intertwining, layered escalation now inevitable. Each glance from the assembled observers, the distant echo of dripping roofs, and the lake wind pressing through fog over water contributed to a growing sense of institutional and social accountability, a quiet but potent force. Logan's stance shifted slightly, the thermos lifting in a casual gesture, signaling control and focus, reinforcing the internal evolution from quiet anger to strategic calm, while Claudia's features betrayed exhaustion and the faintest hint of fear regarding her legacy and social standing. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We'd love to improve and make the next video even better. By late morning, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing the full expanse of Logan Pierce's property along the muddy shoreline. Each cleared space reflecting light off the rain-soaked earth, while the lake wind carried whispers of gossip from neighbors cautiously observing from their porches and fishing docks, coffee thermos in hand, the courthouse rain earlier still dripping from metal roofs. A persistent echo in the background that reminded everyone of accountability. Claudia Whitmore stepped forward, her polished shoes leaving imprints in the wet gravel, clipboard held tightly as if it could anchor her authority against the growing scrutiny, voice smooth but tinged with tension. "The community expects respect for common standards, Logan. You cannot undermine governance and think there will be no consequence." Logan's gaze remained fixed, calm yet commanding, each word deliberate. Standards are meaningless when used selectively and outside legal bounds. Observation and evidence do not lie, Claudia. Every neighbor present witnesses reality. Perception has already shifted. A subtle murmur ran along the shoreline, social pressure mounting invisibly, residents shifting positions, exchanging quiet glances, some avoiding eye contact, the collective judgment layering onto Claudia's composure. The lake wind tugged at her blazer as she adjusted her posture, micro-expression flickering with irritation and fear as she realized that the social narrative was no longer under her control. Logan bent slightly to pick up a small marker, placing it precisely at a property corner, the action both tactical and symbolic, signaling power movement while revealing new discovery. Subtle boundary markers, previously unnoticed by the public, now highlighted through strategic placement, visible to anyone paying attention. It is not just legal, he continued, voice low and measured, but social consequence that weighs heavily. Every movement, every oversight, every assumption of control is recorded and observed. This is public domain now. Claudia's lips parted briefly, her entitlement brushing against emerging concern, the veneer of control starting to thin as the fog pressed over water, wrapping both in an atmospheric tension that emphasized her vulnerability. The distant rumble of thunder punctuated the growing pressure, echoing against the wet cedar and muddy shoreline, emphasizing gravity. Logan's internal evolution was apparent. Quiet anger and strategic transformation merged as he anticipated each of her moves, each micro-adjustment she made in posture and gaze feeding into his calm, layered strategy. The residents' silent judgments, the subtle shift in conversations carried over lake wind, each whisper a social escalation, compounded by the visual of precise documentation in Logan's hands, amplified the humiliation Claudia could not fully mask. The diner silence that had settled earlier now felt charged, punctuated by the occasional drip from metal roofs and the soft slap of rain on the lake's surface, giving weight to every carefully measured exchange. Logan's eyes swept over the shoreline, noting not just the physical markers but the growing network of attention, each neighbor's gaze a subtle reinforcement of shifting power dynamics, a public perception increasingly aligned with his position, layering emotional pressure on the antagonist. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We'd love to improve and make the next video even better, he added, the controlled insertion serving to involve viewers while reinforcing the social consequence. The prestige legal thriller atmosphere building organically through environmental tension, observation, and subtle but palpable shifts in character psychology, audience perception, and escalating accountability. The morning fog had thinned just enough to reveal the full extent of the cleared land, the muddy shoreline glistening under intermittent light that filtered through thick clouds, courthouse rain earlier leaving puddles that reflected both the sky and the watching neighbors, the diner silence wrapping around the scene as pickup trucks sat idle along the gravel driveway, engines quiet yet witness to the tension. Logan Pierce shifted his thermos slightly, exhaling quietly as he assessed every angle of the property, the smell of wet cedar pressing in as the lake wind carried whispers from observers perched on docks and porches, subtle social pressure accumulating with each glance. Claudia Whitmore's posture stiffened, clipboard tight in her grasp, the polished manipulation she had relied upon now tempered by the rising awareness that her unilateral actions were visible, documented, and publicly scrutinized. Her voice, when it came, was clipped but layered with entitlement. You are not above the community, Logan. Authority must be respected, even when inconvenient. Logan's response was measured, controlled, each word an extension of strategic dominance. Authority that violates property law and exceeds permits is not respected. Observation, documentation, and the witness presence make the reality clear. Liability and potential insurance exposure are visible now, both to the community and to you. A neighbor shifted uncomfortably on a porch step, glancing at the fog curling over the water, the cold morning air pressing against them, while others whispered quietly, each murmur an additional layer of social consequence against Claudia. Logan moved deliberately toward the boundary markers, gesturing toward the cleared areas while referencing the permit documentation he had prepared, the courthouse rain still echoing faintly in his memory, reinforcing the prestige legal thriller atmosphere. Each permit, each zoning clarification, each recorded easement is accounted for. Every step taken by the HOA that exceeds this authority is subject to review, with potential liability for damages or improper claims. The residents' observations provide a public record, not just a legal one. Claudia's lips parted, frustration and a flicker of fear crossing her face, the wind tugging at her blazer as she tried to maintain poise while realizing that the social narrative was tilting against her. Logan's calm intensity drew out the subtle cracks in her confidence. Neighbors shifted slightly, some peering from behind curtains, some leaning closer to docks, all silently registering the shift in power dynamics. A gull cried over the lake, its sound amplified in the cold air, the fog pressing close as Logan continued, voice layered. This is no longer about a single disagreement. Liability exposure, public scrutiny, and documented deviations from established procedures are now intertwined. Each observer, each neighbor, each photograph is an additional layer of accountability. The thunder rumbled again, echoing over the water as Claudia's composure faltered just enough for hesitation to be visible. Social pressure and the potential for public judgment combining with the legal exposure to reshape the dynamics in Logan's favor. The gravel crunched softly under his boots as he shifted stance. Thermos held steady, every gesture a controlled signal, reinforcing strategic dominance while maintaining emotional intelligence. The lake wind carrying both the scent of wet cedar and a subtle reminder of the observer's attention. Logan's eyes scanned every face, every posture, every whispered exchange, noting the evolution of perception, the incremental social escalation, the layered legal exposure now fully integrated into a controlled narrative. Internal evolution in Logan manifested as quiet satisfaction and strategic mastery, while Claudia's fear of losing influence and legacy became palpable. The environmental tension of fog, muddy shoreline, and residual courthouse rain amplifying the stakes. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We'd love to improve and make the next video even better. By mid-afternoon, the fog had thinned to a heavy mist, curling across the lake while the muddy shoreline gleamed with residual water from earlier rain. Courthouse echoes still resonating faintly in the distance, thunder rolling low and distant over the hills. Logan Pierce stepped back, thermos in hand, observing the subtle but unmistakable shift in the community's demeanor. The neighbors now gathering along the docks and gravel driveways, whispering quietly amongst themselves, their glances increasingly avoiding Claudia Whitmore as the weight of public scrutiny mounted. Claudia's polished control was cracking visibly. The clipboard she had clutched so tightly earlier now hovered limply, her lips pressed tight as the social consequence of observation began to translate into isolation. I maintain order, Logan. People rely on structure. You cannot expect to rewrite rules in front of witnesses, she said, voice tight, tinged with panic beneath the entitlement she tried to project, the lake wind tugging at her blazer as if the environment itself sided with public judgment. Logan's gaze swept the assembled observers, noting subtle gestures, neighbors turning slightly away from Claudia, quiet murmurs growing in volume, phones subtly raised to document the scene, social perception escalating with each moment. The rules are not yours to enforce unilaterally. Documentation and observation have consequences, he said calmly, voice layered with quiet authority, each word reinforcing both legal and social dominance, his posture controlled but commanding. Claudia shifted, her eyes darting between neighbors' faces, realizing the community's silent alignment against her, her carefully cultivated aura of dominance eroding as gossip and judgment spread organically. The fog pressed over water, dampening sound but amplifying the emotional tension, the diner's silence feeling more oppressive, punctuated by distant metallic drips from rain on roofs and the occasional rattle of a pickup truck idling on the gravel. Logan stepped forward slightly, placing a hand on the edge of the cleared land, a subtle gesture that drew attention to the legal clarity of the property boundaries, reinforcing his strategic positioning while Claudia's posture betrayed the subtle tremor of concern, fear of social collapse, and loss of legacy beginning to surface. The neighbors shifted subtly, some leaning to whisper to one another, others nodding quietly, their observations reinforcing the public humiliation, while Claudia's passive-aggressive control faltered with each acknowledgement, the fog over the lake carrying the sound of murmured judgments like a tangible pressure. Logan's calm, measured presence, the steady thermos in hand, and deliberate placement of visual cues for the assembled audience emphasized both power and emotional intelligence, highlighting the collapse of Claudia's authority while reinforcing the prestige legal thriller atmosphere. The wet cedar scent, damp gravel, and subtle courthouse echoes layered onto the visual observation, intensifying her emotional shift and social isolation. The neighbor's body language now signaling quiet rejection, whispers growing into a cohesive narrative of accountability and judgment. and Logan's quiet anger and controlled strategy converging into a visible display of public payoff and humiliation. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We'd love to improve and make the next video even better. By late afternoon, the fog over the lake had lifted just enough to reveal the gleaming, muddy shoreline. The splatter of puddles catching the residual light from clouds heavy with courthouse rain, distant thunder rolling low across the hills. Logan Pierce remained calm, thermos in hand, noting the subtle shifts in neighborhood attention as whispers increased along gravel driveways and fishing docks, observers positioning themselves at angles that gave them full view without engagement. The sudden arrival of a marked sheriff's vehicle at the end of the street sent a ripple through the gathered neighbors. Engines of other trucks idling nervously, the wind carrying a scent of wet cedar and damp earth that seemed to heighten every heart rate. Claudia Whitmore froze, clipboard trembling, lips pressed tight, entitlement faltering as the uniformed officer stepped onto the muddy shoreline, followed by a county investigator carrying a leather-bound folder, eyes scanning the perimeter with quiet authority. Logan's voice cut through the charged diner silence, calm and measured. This is exactly why adherence to permits, legal authority, and documented property lines matters. Observation, witnesses, and proper procedure now align with enforcement. Authority does not rest on assumption. A murmur of agreement ran among neighbors, their eyes now focused not on Claudia, but on the institutional presence validating Logan's position, social consequence, and public judgment swelling visibly as whispers turned to nods, phones raised subtly to document proceedings. Claudia's posture wavered, her polished manipulation failing as the sheriff quietly requested documentation, while the county investigator unfolded notes, reviewing every marker, previous overreach, and violation she had initiated. "You cannot halt legal oversight," Logan added, eyes steady, voice layered, each syllable reinforcing dominance while layered legal consequences and social perception worked in concert. Claudia attempted a flustered reply, voice tight. "This is unnecessary. The board, the community." But the investigator's quiet clearance to observe and the sheriff's measured attention rendered her authority hollow, the social isolation palpable as neighbors averted glances, some stepping back from the shoreline entirely. Gossip now formalized by the presence of law. Logan moved deliberately toward a cleared boundary marker, gesturing to the silo placement and the meticulously documented permits, the fog pressing against them, amplifying emotional tension, courthouse rain earlier resonating in memory as the legal weight settled. The community's silent acknowledgement of authority, the layered pressure from observed judgment, and institutional enforcement combined into a powerful payoff. Claudia's confidence visibly eroding, social isolation palpable, whispers and subtle gestures multiplying into a cohesive signal that her dominance was nullified. The lake wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic echo of distant rooftops, reinforcing observation and accountability, while Logan's calm stance, notebook in hand, thermos steady, eyes scanning the neighbors' reactions, demonstrated strategic mastery and emotional intelligence. Each neighbor's position, each phone subtly recording, each nod or avoidance further dismantled Claudia's previous control, legal enforcement, and public perception converging into a prestige payoff that layered humiliation, institutional exposure, and social collapse in a continuous, escalating atmosphere. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We'd love to improve and make the next video even better. By late evening, the fog had settled into a heavy, slow-moving blanket over the lake, the muddy shoreline reflecting dim, muted light as the courthouse rain from earlier still left lingering puddles across gravel driveways and docks. Logan Pierce stood calmly beside the 100-foot silo, thermos in hand, surveying the property with a sense of measured triumph, the cold air carrying the faint scent of wet cedar and damp earth. Claudia Whitmore lingered at the edge of the cleared land, her polished shoes now scuffed with mud, clipboard dropped to the ground, eyes darting nervously to neighbors who avoided her gaze, whispers spreading like wildfire, social consequence fully realized. "This community observes and enforces what is lawful, Claudia. Authority without law and consensus is temporary. Logan stated quietly, each word layered with control and emotional intelligence, reinforcing power while allowing public perception to solidify. The sheriff remained on the perimeter, quietly observing, county investigators moving with procedural calm as the HOA president's influence visibly eroded, neighbors shifting from silent judgment to subtle nods of acknowledgement toward Logan's rightful actions. Claudia's shoulders slumped, the veneer of entitlement fading as the social isolation and public humiliation intensified, whispers climbing into an unstoppable wave of community judgment. Logan took a slow step toward the reopened gate at the shoreline, the fog swirling against his flannel as he gestured to the restored boundaries, the cold air now carrying a sense of quiet justice, the diner-like silence filled with the unspoken weight of community support. Access restored, boundaries respected, and every step documented. He continued, voice calm, controlled, and methodically layered, the legal dominance mirrored in the social recovery and public validation. The neighbors, once hesitant, now gathered more openly, quietly observing the reclaimed space, some offering nods or small gestures of support, reinforcing emotional restoration and public respect. The prestige legal thriller atmosphere complete with residual courthouse echoes, subtle wind over water, and lingering fog heightening cinematic tension. The lake wind carried the faint rustle of leaves along the shoreline, damp cedar scent mingling with fresh mud, signaling emotional closure and the triumph of methodical strategy over passive-aggressive manipulation, every subtle shift in body language confirming a restored balance of dignity, reclaimed property access, and community acknowledgement. As the evening light dimmed, Logan paused beside the quiet garage where his tools and thermos rested, gaze sweeping across the restored workspace and reopened gate, cinematic yet grounded, the shoreline and workshop emblematic of emotional peace and lawful triumph. The story's layers of social revenge, legal revenge, emotional healing, public humiliation, and reflective closure stacked in a satisfying resolution, demonstrating to viewers the payoff of strategic, calm intelligence in the face of entitlement and manipulation. The lessons emerged clearly. Observation matters. Proper legal alignment can overcome social intimidation. Public perception amplifies consequences, and patient, intelligent action yields both justice and restoration. Logan's eyes scanned the quiet community, noting the ripple of social recalibration, a final acknowledgement that careful, controlled strategy had not only reclaimed property, but restored emotional dignity and respect, leaving a lasting imprint on both the antagonist and the neighborhood. The fog drifted over the lake, the muddy shoreline glistening, the reopened gates standing as a quiet symbol of victory, workshop tools neatly arranged, and the community observing in silent aftermath, all combining to create a cinematic yet grounded image of closure and justice. Rank the story from 10 to 0. I would love to know what you think. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We would love to improve and make the next video even better.